Welcome back to the Champion Forum podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Hancher, and I am on a mission to help everyone lead, inspire, and win in this life. I've been pursuing our guest today for over 3 years. And today, listener, is a testament that persistence certainly pays off. As an award winning keynote speaker, an 11-time New York Times bestselling author, host of the top rated corporate competitor podcast, executive leadership coach, longtime associate editor for Sports Illustrated, Don Yaeger has fashioned a career as one of America's most provocative thought leaders. He's primarily sought to discuss lessons on achieving greatness, learned from firsthand work alongside some of the greatest sports and business legends in the world. Throughout his writing career, Don has developed a reputation as a world-class storyteller. In fact, renowned thought leaders such as John Maxwell and Simon Sinek have called Don the best storyteller they've ever worked with. He has penned more than 36 books, including an incredible 11 New York Times bestsellers. A graduate of Ball State University, where he was selected as one of the university's 50 graduates of distinction over its first century and subsequently was inducted into their Hall of Fame in 2022. Don now resides in Tallahassee, Florida. He and his wife, Jeanette, have a son, Will, and a daughter, Madeline. Don Yaeger, welcome to the show.
Jeff, you now got Will and Madeline listening, so that's good. They're always Will and Maddie are always looking in. They want to make sure their names get mentioned, right? They don't like
That's
it when
it.
the intro just says he has a son and a daughter. They want
No,
names,
no,
right?
we got to
Yeah,
go there. They're
that's
they're
right.
they're people, and they got an amazing dad. And I've heard you talk about your kids, and I think it was a show I was listening to of Lewis Howes, and he asked you if you were coaching your son's team, and you were like, "No, I kind of go to the practices and hang out, but I'm not coaching the team." So I've kind of followed your journey,
Well,
not just as what you do, but and by the way, Dawn, I love your work, but I think you're even a better man than the work you produce. So I
that's
love
right.
watching you and modeling after your pursuit of excellence.
Jeff, thank you. It means a lot. And man, I was starting to feel old the way you were reading all those little, all those commas that were he's this, comma, that. After a few commas, I was starting to think, gosh, that guy must be really old. And then I realized it was me. So anyway.
Well, I have to tell you, when I was building the intro, I felt like I could use the entire episode and the entire time we had by introducing you because your body of work is so extensive. It is amazing. And even from your childhood, you grew up in Hawaii. Next thing you know, you're an 11-time New York Times bestselling author, right?
Well, and hopefully by the time your show airs, the Deion Sanders book will have made it number 12. We're really
Hey,
hoping that
there is
Deion
no doubt.
Dion becomes bestseller number 12, which would be pretty incredible. So,
I,
yes.
I, I have no doubt you got another dozen bestsellers in you, minimum.
By the way, just to add, just to make sure there's context to this, when we got to 11, the New York Times allowed me to learn that fewer than 30 writers in history in the nonfiction category had ever achieved 11. So it's to think that I've got another dozen in me might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's been a pretty amazing run.
You're the John Wooden of bestsellers.
I
I
don't know
mean,
if I'm the John. No,
you know,
nobody's the
he
John Wooden.
he mentored you, so it's only fitting that you're the GOAT. You're the greatest of all time.
He's my man. I have to
No,
tell you, I was there a couple of weeks ago. I was in Los Angeles recently for the presentation. The UCLA their business school, actually the Anderson School there, produces an annual award or inducts a member every year to the John Wooden Global Leadership Award, and it's the some of the best leaders in the world. And Ed Bastian, who's the CEO of Delta,
mhm.
with whom I'm currently writing a book, was this year's winner of that award. So I thought
Wow.
it was so cool to be there with Ed being recognized with the John Wooden Award. It was kind of this amazing full circle moment for me to go back and be in the room with all of Coach Wooden's family and talk and think and love on the time that we had together and appreciate the time I'm getting with Ed today, which is really great.
Yeah, it is amazing. I have some amazing mentors as well. And I'm probably going back 2 years, Don, where I think it was either a YouTube video you had put out. I can't remember exactly the content, but I remember you talking about what John Wooden expected of you.
Mm-hmm.
And, the conversation went something like, you had better come prepared to
Mm-hmm.
ask questions and have an agenda. I'm not like coming here to just give you advice and knowledge, like, come with your stuff.
Right.
And it really made me do a better job preparing for my mentoring meetings and really thinking about, like, how am I going into this meeting? And I believe it was like every other month, you would literally fly out to California and spend time with him
I
to do
would.
that. What was that experience like? I mean, John Wooden as a mentor.
Well, it was the most, I mean, again, most extraordinary thing you could have imagined. The way it began was Shaquille O'Neal, who at the time was the 26-year-old star center of the Los Angeles Lakers, right? He was making bad movies like Kazam and all things like that. But I had learned through his college coach, who's one of my best friends, that Shaq was going out every month and spending time with John Wooden. And so I reached out. I was like, Shaq, well, I mean, tell me about this. And he says, yeah, Coach Wooden is my mentor.
Hmm.
And I thought, here's 26-year-old Shaq, 88-year-old John Wooden. What in the other than basketball, what do they have in common, right? And I asked Shaq if he'd let me sit in on one of the sessions, and he did. And so we're sitting there, and it's this beautiful conversation. Goes on for several hours, but never once did they talk about basketball. It was
Hmm.
about how to be a better father, how to be a better husband, how to be a better team leader, right? How to generate energy around you, right? What does it take? And finally, session's coming to an end. Everybody's getting up, and I look at Coach Wooden and I said, Coach, you're amazing. You're one of the most extraordinary people on the planet. How does somebody get somebody like you as a mentor? And he said, you ask.
Hmm.
And I said, well, how many people ask? He said, not as many as you might think. Most people immediately they just walk themselves out of the opportunity by never asking. And I said,
Hmm.
wow. I went back, wrote the story about Shaq and this beautiful opportunity. And a month later I called Coach. We're talking, and I said, Coach, somewhere in the end of that conversation, I felt like I was supposed to ask.
Hmm.
And he said, what took you so long?
Wow.
And then I asked him, I said, okay, what does this look like? And he laid out for me what you made reference to there a second ago, Jeff, that there's a responsibility that both the mentor and the mentee have in the relationship, right?
Mhm.
The mentor is supposed to serve and offer up content that is not just about how to be better professionally. Sometimes you got to open yourself up personally. You got to
Mhm.
tell stories of your own failures. You have to you have to make sure that the person learning from you is in fact that learning from you, right? And John Wooden used to say, "You have not taught until they have learned." And a lot of
Hmm.
times we think we've taught because we've spoken. Because we're not teaching when we speak; we're only teaching when they learn.
Wow.
And so that was the first piece. Then the second was, he said, as you made point, it will be your job as the mentee to come prepared. When you run out of questions, our session is over. And so I had a day on the calendar with John Wooden, and I was not letting go,
No
right?
way.
And every other month for 12 years, he allowed me to come do that. And I recorded 500 hours of conversation. It was extraordinary. I learned so much, but every month,
Wow.
every time when I came, it was with a game plan.
Mhm.
Today, I want to learn, how do you keep the 13th player on your team, the guy that's so far down the bench, he'll never even get out of his sweats. How do you keep that person inspired and engaged
Hmm.
even when because again, we all have those people in our
Oh
office,
yeah.
right? That 13th person who doesn't get any credit, but if they become soured, they can become a cancer in your organization. And Coach Wood spent an entire day, but the way we did it was I went through every season of his last 15 seasons, and I identified who the 13th person was on the team based on playing
Wow.
time and other things. and he would tell me stories about how he worked to navigate the relationship with each one of those people, because some of them 3 years later were a starter on the team, you know,
Unreal.
and so there was a game plan for our sessions together, and it allowed me to become to learn, it was a master class in learning without question.
Yeah. Well, I say this all the time. You've heard it, Don. Two things that can change who you become: what you consume and who you surround yourself with. And
Mhm.
I feel so often, people, one, they don't ask for great mentoring. Like who you surround yourself with matters. You talk about the inner circle a lot. And who
Mhm.
you surround yourself absolutely matters. But then it's like you get this golden opportunity and people really don't even know what to say or what do I ask. So I think what you just presented, was absolutely valuable to that leader that might be listening, that person that's aspiring for greatness. Like get around greatness and ask the right questions because they have a lot of the answers to where you want to go.
Well, they do, but again, most mentoring relationships I've been in over the course of my lifetime, um, you don't show up and they've got the answer without the question, right?
Mhm.
So it is about it's incumbent upon you
Mhm.
as the student, if you will, to determine what it is you're coming to learn and developing that game plan.
Don, why do you think it is that most people don't ask? Don't ask for the help or don't ask for the mentoring or don't send the message?
I think it's a fear of rejection. It's that sense of what if I asked and he said I'm too busy? What if he asked and said, no? Then suddenly, boy, how would that make me feel? Would that make me feel different about my hero, right? John
Hmm.
Wooden, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think there's that. And I think the second piece of it is there's there's a fear of what would happen if they said yes,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Then boy, what and man, now I'm going to get a chance to learn from John Wooden. What am I going to learn from John Wooden? And
Uh,
so
yeah.
it's a
It,
either answer can seem daunting
yeah.
if you don't if you don't ask.
And a little intimidating. I remember our mutual friend, Tim Elmore.
Mhm.
I knew of Tim. I had read his books. I've seen him on the big stages. I had heard he was launching a new book. I'm like, this is a golden opportunity. On a whim, one day, Don, I sent him a video message on LinkedIn, of which I got a response. And I'm still thinking, this surely isn't actually Tim Elmore. And sure enough, it was. He comes on the show. And I said, man, I'd love to keep the conversation going somehow. And he said, if you're ever in the Atlanta area, get with Melissa, my admin, and let's try to grab lunch. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I said these words. I said, I'm actually going to be in the Atlanta area. And he's like, well, let me connect you with Melissa. Now, I wasn't actually going to be, I was going to be in the Atlanta area to have lunch with
Like
Tim,
as
right?
in, like you were going to be in the Atlanta area, like as in Charlotte, right?
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
I literally flew down, had lunch, and flew back to Pittsburgh. But I thought, you know what? If he's saying yes, I have so much to learn. I had 7 questions ready for the lunch. He introduces me to this. One of them was book writing. I have not yet wrote a book. He introduces me to book in a weekend. I have to apply. I have to go through this vetting process. I finally get in the room. I find out that Don Yaeger is a live speaker at the event. And oh my gosh, had I not even sent the video, I wouldn't even have gotten to the event. So to your point, Don, like imagine not asking John Wooden,
Right.
hey, what's it take? And how it transformed your life.
He changed
And
my life.
even
No
wrote a
question.
book with him.
Yep.
Just
We wrote a book
amazing.
together. It's funny. One of my favorite pictures in the world, shortly, we were it was toward the end of our time together because he passed away at 99, but um, and I became a father for the first time. And so my little boy, Coach Wooden, every time we talked, he was like, when are you going to bring Will out to come to meet me? And I'm like, Coach, he's a baby, like he'll never remember, it'll never matter. And he's like, no, you got to do it. And so he was 9 months old, and my wife and I, we traveled the country to put Will on an airplane to take him to meet John Wooden. And it's still this amazing picture because Coach Wooden had fallen that morning. This is like the kind of guy he is, right? He's 93, probably at the time 97, maybe 97. He'd fallen that morning, and when he fell, his thumb got caught on a table and it pulled all the way, basically out of socket, right?
Mm.
And his physical trainer, who's a friend of mine, says, Don, I mean, just wanted you to know if you go to shake coach's hand, be careful, like, because his thumb, right? All good stuff. So as he's telling me this, coach has got my son on his lap. And I look over, and Will, for whatever reason, had chosen to grab John Wooden's hand and stick his thumb in Will's mouth. Which I always love. I'm like, Will, you were sucking the thumb of greatness, right? At 9 months
Yeah.
old, you were sucking the thumb of greatness. It's good, right?
Get
But
that in you.
he's sucking the thumb that had been dislocated, and Coach Wooden had to hurt, but he was just so gracious and loving that he
Mm,
didn't say a word, right?
mm,
He just loved on Will, and
mm,
I remember we took a picture of that moment, and I still hold on to it because it's one of those moments that
mm.
just remind me that that's it, right? That's when
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, he's most accomplished human I'll probably ever meet,
Mm.
and he didn't for a second say, no, you get your son's mouth off my thumb, right? He just was
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Right.
this is awesome. So anyway, it was cool.
That's the difference between who somebody is and what somebody's done.
Yep.
And that matters. I mean, look, that's amazing in and of itself, but it doesn't end there. You've played one-on-one with Michael Jordan. You lived with Walter Payton, 10 weeks leading up to his last days here. You've roamed the Middle East interviewing Iraqi athletes tortured by Hussein's
Saddam
son.
Hussein, man,
Yeah,
crazy.
Saddam Hussein's son.
Yeah.
That story in and of itself is you've been on the Oprah Winfrey Show. You've been close, like we talked about with John Wooden. You've traveled with presidential candidates. And these are just to name a few of the things that you've done. And I'm not sure if it's even possible, but as you look back, what have you been most proud of some of the work that you've put out there?
Um, Gosh, that's like, do you have more than one child, Jeff?
Yeah.
Do you pick between your children?
No.
Yes, you do. Come on, we all do. Don't lie. That's okay.
I
Deion
can't say it
Sanders.
on air,
Deion
Don.
Deion Sanders says that to me all the time. He's like, "Of course we pick between our children." Deion, as you may or may not know, has 5 kids, and he stack ranks his kids every day. Like so the kids know where are you today, right? And it's a fun little thing that he does. But I laugh about it all the time because I'm going. I only have two, and they're pretty sure I stack rank them every day too. But so yeah, how are you going to pick between one of the? But maybe the thing that most changed my career, my life, other than John Wooden later, but was when Walter Payton could have picked any writer in the world to work with him and write his book, right? And he chose me. I mean, he allowed me to be the guy who would tell his amazing story at the most vulnerable time of his life, right? And he was my hero. I
Mhm.
mean, I love me some Walter Payton. Have his
Mm,
jersey right over my shoulder here. Have his picture up there on the other. I mean, I have Walter Payton everywhere, right? Because he's so impactful. But he, allowing me to be there as part of his um, greatest challenge, at the end of his life, and trusting me. This is
mm,
where it really this is the thing that happens. See, in journalism or writing with somebody else, um, there's certain functional aspects of it, but the real key to all of it is they have to learn to trust you, right? And once because they're not going to share any of the really good stuff until they do. And
mhm,
so, how do you engender that trust? How do you grow that trust? And Walter, just from the very beginning, said, "I trust you," and he had to because we were only going to get however many weeks together. We didn't know it was only going to be 10, but he knew he would not be alive when I was writing the book. He would
mm,
be passed, which meant he had to trust that I would fully represent everything that we said and did and talked about together, even though he would not be there to check me. Right. And that moment changed my career
mm,
because from that moment on, other athletes, there was this sense that if Walter Payton trusted you, I trust you, right?
mhm,
Some people can transfer to you something that you can't earn for yourself.
Yeah.
And Walter Payton transferred trust to me in a way that changed my career.
And I mean, to think about that story and like what it's done to your career, obviously, but this gets back to integrity and who you are. Like you could be a great writer and never get the opportunity that you've had with so many amazing people. And I've heard you tell stories about some of the intimate things that Walter would share with you, things about his young daughters and things you even as a man of integrity held on to, and can you tell that story, by the way?
Sure. One day while I was with Walter, it was toward the end, probably a couple weeks before he passed, maybe 3 weeks. I wanted to ask that day. My question was, Walter, first ballot Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, rushing leader in the history of the NFL, just about everything you would want professionally to have accomplished, Walter Payton had accomplished. And I asked him if you could trade all of those accolades, all of those things for one day in the future, what would that day be? And he didn't bat an eye. And he looked at me and he said, I'd give it all to walk my daughter down the aisle.
Mm,
And he proceeded over the next 40, 45 minutes to just talk to me about what he would do on the day his daughter got married, what he'd say to her, what she'd look like. It was just this amazing, it was beautiful conversation. But what it told me was this was in his mind, like far, far deeper than my very simple question,
yeah.
which was pretty deep in its own right, I thought. But I was going someplace with him that he was already, but he had never said. Um, well, his daughter was 13 years old at the time,
Mm,
and his and there would be nothing less appropriate than for me to have included in a book that her father, who she had just watched pass away, was thinking about her wedding day. Like, I think about how horrible that would be for a 13-year-old girl
mm,
to read that and realize that, and so I didn't put it in the book. It never appeared anywhere. Um, 14 years later, I get a phone call from Brittany, his daughter, and she's like, Don, I'm getting married and would love for you guys to be there. Love for you to be there. And I said, man, this is awesome. But I got something for you. And I
mm.
said, I need to come see you. And did. And I shared with her what her father would say to her on her wedding day
Wow.
and was able to play it all back for her, kind of get her. And we cried our eyes out. And we just had this really amazing day. But it just reminded me like that's what it really means to be in relationship. That's what it really
Hmm.
means to be trusted and to
Hmm.
and maintain the trust.
Mm.
I had never told her that her dad
Wow.
had told me those stories. I'd never told anyone in Walter's family that conversation had happened because at any stage somebody would have said, "Man, I can't believe Walter was thinking that," and it
Mm.
didn't deserve to be known, but it was what Walter was thinking. And
Wow.
so we had that really amazing and intimate period. And then I had it again with his daughter. And a few years later, she did a TV special about her dad in Chicago, and she told the story. And that was the first time I ever felt free to tell it to anybody else because I wasn't going to tell it until she told it.
It's such a beautiful story and why and thank you for sharing why I wanted to draw it out. I mean, primarily we have leaders and entrepreneurs listening to this show. And I speak all the time, Dawn, about like what we do and who we are different, and get beyond the results and lead people. Get beyond writing a best-selling book and exemplify people in a story. And I think that story exemplifies who you are beyond a best-selling book or anything else. So thanks for sharing. I mean, look, you've been alongside some greatness. I mean, many, many times. And thinking about the audience we're speaking to today, in your research and interviews with amazing coaches, amazing leaders, what common strategies or practices have you found to be essential in building a championship team culture? I mean, you talk about this a lot in your book, greatness, the 16 characteristics of true champions. What are those things? What are the common things that you see time and time again that people do over time to build those routines to become great?
Well, I'm going to offer that there's actually kind of two different questions here. One is about teams, right? And one, so greatness. When I fashioned that book, and I appreciate you flashing it up, by the way. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
But when I built that book, it was really about it was the culmination of 2,500 interviews over the course of 30 years of journalism, where I asked great champions to tell me the habits they built into their daily routine that allowed them to gain a competitive advantage. What allowed you to separate yourself from other people? And but that's about individual habits. It's about hating to lose more than you love to win, right? It's about not allowing yourself to make excuses when things don't go your way. It's about creating. It's about seeking mentors, right? It's about
Yeah.
finding people that you need to surround yourself with. It's about a sense of faith, right? That the great ones I've worked with have a belief in something bigger than themselves. They
Mm,
know that they may be extraordinary, but there's something bigger, and that helps keep them in relationship with a level of humility that's required in order to be great, right?
mm,
You know, I want you to be arrogant in preparation and humble in performance,
mm,
right? That's the way the great ones. That's the way the
mm,
great ones deliver. And so you start going through these habits, and that's what the great ones do. But then there's great teams, and how do great teams find their way to coalesce? And so, and the first part of your question was about how do you create that
hmm.
environment, that culture.
Yeah.
And the number one answer I got, I also wrote a book called Great Teams on the
Hmm.
habits of high performing
Hmm.
teams.
Hmm.
And I spent years just traveling the world studying the best teams. And the number one answer that came up is that the best teams have a sense, they don't just know their sense of purpose. That's, we all know our why, if you will. The great teams feel their why. They feel who they matter to and why what they do matters.
Mm.
Um, that you do this podcast, Jeff, doesn't it could be very functional for you. You could have a series of questions, you got to get through them. Let's do this. But if you constantly remember that note from, Jenny from Omaha that wrote you about some episode you did and what it meant to her and how it changed her and her leadership style, that sense of constantly be reminded that we matter and that what we do matters and how we conduct ourselves matters allows you to create the energy, the discretionary energy that makes what you do all the more impactful. So being not just aware of your sense of purpose, your reason for being, but feeling it. Like, how do
Mm.
I feel? So it's not just about getting the note from Jenny, it's about picking up the phone and
Hmm.
calling Jenny, getting to know her a
Hmm.
little bit
Yeah.
and realizing, you know what, we're lucky. We get a chance to touch people. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of us as entrepreneurs get to do that.
Yeah. It is pretty dynamic. I remember you telling a story, about trying to bring in the collective team and how do you go about doing that? Because everybody's so different. And I remember you telling the story about the dream team.
Right.
And
Right.
I think it was Coach Daly maybe that said, "Hey, look, I got one rule, be here on time." And he went and talked about that. Can you share that story?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that happens when you gather a group of high performers who understand why they're gathered together,
Yeah.
right? Is that
Which is back to the common purpose.
right common purpose? And the common purpose was, for those who don't remember that window of time, USA basketball had the best players in the world, but we weren't winning the Olympics.
Hmm.
The Russians were other teams were beating us because USA basketball, even though they had talent, didn't have the best teams. And so uh, this team was fashioned to show the world that if we bring our best athletes to the Olympics and we fuel them with the right sense of purpose, no one's close to as good as they can be. And that was Jordan and Barkley and Larry Bird and it was just the most amazing collection, right? You put them all together, and the end result was that Chuck Daly realized you put a great group of people together with a purpose that is uber clear. The last thing you should do as a leader is then load them up with a whole bunch of rules.
Yeah,
As you said, he had one rule: be on time. And but be on time speaks to a lot of other things. Chuck
sure
Daly
does.
once told me, right? It speaks to your respect for each other, right? If I'm not on time, it's generally because I believe myself to be more my time is more valuable than yours. If so you're trying to constantly think about, like, what if you had to simplify it, like Coach Daly, what would that look like in your office? What would
Hmm.
your one rule be? I don't know, but it's a really great exercise.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that Michael Jordan was always the first one there after
First one
hearing
there.
that. And like as the unspoken leader of the team, everybody kind of followed suit.
Yep.
And, in that book, you talk about the importance of accountability with championship teams. Could you elaborate to the leaders listening on how do we instill a culture of accountability while still fostering support and collaboration? How do we find that balance?
So the first thing you have to do if you want to try to create a culture of accountability is to be accountable yourself, right? Don't say be on time and then you show up 3 minutes late because you're the leader and you can, right?
Sure.
Don't say we're going to treat each other with respect and then be disrespectful when someone is not in the room. If you want to create a sense of accountability, whatever you declare the rules are, or that the standards are, you better be prepared to live to them. And
Hmm.
don't say we're a family first organization and then complain every time someone needs to take an afternoon off because their kid's sick, right? Be aware of what you say and what you do, because that's where accountability collides for most people. But
Mm,
once you start showing your own level of accountability, then it's your responsibility to universally hold everyone else to the same standards. Too often in organizations, if you're a high performer, if you're a great scorer, if you're a high, you deliver great sales results on a regular basis, I'm gonna let you get away with a little bit more than I'm gonna let other
hmm.
people get away with. By the way, that just doesn't work. There's again, if you're going to declare it a standard, hold everybody to it.
Sure.
If you're not willing to hold everybody to it, don't declare it a standard. So accountability is so important because it speaks to who you are and it speaks to how you see them.
That's so good. And when you think about that, when you were giving the answer to that, one of the things that I thought about, which I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and senior leaders talking about, is this dynamic of, all right, you have a team, it's a unit, but there are individuals that make up the unit. And here comes the chasm. Here comes the challenge. How do you go about navigating the balance between fostering that individual talent and promoting this cohesive team dynamic within a team or an organization? Because you have the peak performer, but then you have the enthusiastic beginner. They're all wired differently. How do we find this cohesive unit by putting these individuals together?
Well, one of the most important things you have to do as a leader is communicate, right? Is to be able to actually, and nothing creates a greater chasm than a failure to actually have clarity in what is expected of people, right? I expect different things from my high performer, and
Hmm.
they should know that. But by the way, if I'm expecting something different of this, and I don't mean from a standards, right? The standards are important. I'm talking about other, maybe performance related issues. I expect certain things from my high performer, but I also expect certain things from my young enthusiastic person, and they both need to know that the expectations are different.
Hmm.
So if you're kind of only having this conversation over here and this conversation over there, you're almost certainly going to engender a sense of, boy, I'm carrying this team. boy, but if everybody, Bill Belichick used to say it all the time, do your job, right? Do
Yeah,
your
that's
job.
right.
3 words, maybe the most three, maybe some of the three of the best words ever said in team building. Do
Yeah.
your job. And by the way, your job's different from my job.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you, and it's when I go to do your job that the world gets screwed up. Do your job, do my job, right? If I
Yeah.
That's my responsibility, and I think that that's where but there has to be clarity and there has to be communication. So if you want to do the job, want you to do your job well, Jeff, and I should do my job well, it's important that we, in fact, even know how those two jobs gel, how they come
Hmm.
together to create a greater good.
Yeah. This kind of goes down this road of assessing potential, because I didn't make it to the NBA despite all my efforts, right? But Michael Jordan is on this whole nother level of play. Well, his potential is greater than mine in that sport as well. And so my high school coach probably managed me different than maybe Michael Jordan's did. But I think one of the things I think is what I'm hearing you say is like one, know what your assignment is, but two, even if you have five people with the same assignment, that one step down is Don's potential in doing this assignment is different than Jeff's. And so I'm going to lead that person to their potential because if we can get everybody on the team chasing their fullest potential, the whole team's going to lift.
That's it right there. The recipe doesn't sound that complicated, but it is, which is why so few
Oh
teams
my gosh, it's
are
maddening.
world
Yeah.
class. Yeah.
Well, especially if you as a coach were a peak performer, then it's like, well, why doesn't everybody just do it like me? Right?
It's why so few peak performers make great coaches. It's one of the things I've enjoyed most about studying Deion Sanders for this last year plus while writing his book is I mean, here's a guy that's greatest of all time, his position, greatest of all
Yeah.
time. I mean, you know, hard to believe that guy, and yet he can drive great because one thing, and I asked him about this, and he had this great line. He said, I had him on my podcast recently. You mentioned corporate competitor, and thank you
Mhm.
for mentioning that.
Yeah.
But in talking to him, one of the questions I asked him was, "Why are so few great coaches, or great players, good coaches?" And he said, "Because too many of them are trying to recreate who they were." He goes, I get it. I was the best. Like, ain't nobody gonna be as good as me, right? And that's just
Time down.
Dion. But that's good, right? He gets it. And he goes, so I'm not asking them to be me. Like I'm not living a second life through them. He said, I want them to be the best them that they can, to your point.
Mhm.
And very few coaches, very few players who are really awesome can actually adjust their mindset thusly.
Well, the fact that his children are such amazing athletes is a testament to his ability to do that.
Yeah.
The story's out, the jury's out as far as how far they'll go and all of that, but that's a big shadow to walk in for sure.
Yeah.
Don, leadership, it's daily riddled with setbacks. It's adversities. That's what we do. We take the biggest problems and we're problem solvers. When leaders are facing these setbacks and challenges, what are some strategies that you've seen some of the greatest coaches, some of the greatest leaders, what do they employ when they're trying to go through this adversity, yet maintain morale and momentum towards still achieving the mission? What are some things that you've seen?
Well, one thing that I've seen with some great, and this is going to be, this is all recent, right? I'm going to share with you some recency, and I would argue this has always been true, but there's just um, so many data points that I've been able to witness. COVID, right? What COVID did to so many industries. It also sent a lot of leaders into retirement
Mm,
because but the leaders that I've enjoyed studying, um, the CEO of AMC Theaters, right? Think about it. Think about running a company with heavy debt, and suddenly nobody can come to even if they wanted to, they couldn't come to your pro. Think about being Ed Bastian at Delta, right? Where,
mhm.
on February 14th, 2020, he hands out $1.6 $1 billion in employee profit sharing to
Hmm.
his team because he's so proud of all that they've accomplished together. 30 days later, nobody can get on an airplane, right? 95% of his customers were gone. And and the best leaders are those, and when I've talked to these leaders that we're talking about here, they they loved that moment, right? They believed they were made for that moment.
Hmm.
And all of, yes, there's daily crises and but boy, when it was big, I was made for the moment. And I love and it's not a false sense of belief in themselves. There's ample evidence that they were in fact made for the moment, but it was the collection of experiences and the things they've done. So the first thing I think a great leader in adversity needs to is to you have to stop first and say, am I made for this moment? And if you then can look at yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, you know what, everything I've done, sharpen the edges so that I would be ready for this moment. Then you enter with this sense of confidence that allows
Mm.
others to feed from it. But you have to believe you were made for the moment.
Mm.
And I think that that's one of the great challenges. It's why, like I said, you look at the numbers. I mean, the number of CEOs of significant companies that took COVID as a way to go, to get out.
Yeah.
It said, but then those who stayed and did it well, they knew why.
Oh, yeah. And I think, this belief that you're made for the moment
Mhm.
probably comes after preparing for the moment,
You
because preparation breeds the confidence.
right.
I interviewed a special ops commander once, and he told a story about they're getting ready to do their first big deployment, small team, 6 people. And he said, "We're just waiting for the words lift off because we know that we've practiced, we know the target, we know the every square inch of this house that we're going to invade, we know where the bad guys are, we're ready to go." And he said, at the last minute, they told us to shut down the engines, and we were devastated. He said, "I want you to think about that for a minute. We could have given up our life or we were taking life, but either way, it was going to be a tragic moment, and we were all disappointed. Why? Because we prepared for the moment and we were built for the moment." And I'm like, wow. Like, talk about perspective. Now I don't see this as a problem. I see this as an opportunity. And you've seen some greats do that. So great feedback. I opened by telling the audience what an amazing storyteller you are. Needless to say, all the best-selling books. I believe storytelling even transcends book writing. I think some of the best leaders tell great stories. What advice do you have for the leader listening on how they can leverage storytelling as a tool for inspiring and motivating their teams?
So I have the good fortune you made reference to Simon Sinek, John Maxwell calling me one of the best storytellers they've ever worked with. Seems awful arrogant to say, but
Unbelievable.
we'll stick with that and we'll let them
Yeah,
we'll play in their
we'll believe them.
sandbox for a little while. We'll believe them. And but so Simon actually reached out to me during the pandemic and asked me if I would help teach storytelling into his world, into his community, which I do now on a regular basis. We do virtual storytelling sessions where I teach corporations and others how to be better at this skill, and it is a skill, right? Um, which means it can be developed, and that's the reason why I use that word, because a lot of people think it's a gift, like you get story. No, it's a skill and it's developed. But the two major mistakes that I think most storytellers make is they don't know enough about who their audience is, right? They don't know who they are telling the story to, because if you know who you're telling the story to, you will make adjustments to the
Mm,
way you what you might emphasize, what you might pause right after saying, so that they make sure that syncs. Know your audience. That's number one. It's the biggest mistake most storytellers make, especially leaders, right? We look and we think everybody is just, they're all out there to hear us. No,
mhm,
our job is to be heard by them. Remember I said
mhm.
before, John Wooden, You haven't taught until they have learned.
Mm.
So our job is to be heard by them, but we can't do that if we don't know who they are and we don't know a little about them. The second part, the second big weakness of most storytellers in a corporate setting is that they don't have a defined call to action at the end of the story. Every story, every well-told story should lead you to do, think, or feel something when it's over, right? Do, think, or feel something when it's over. And you, as the storyteller, should know what you want them to do, think, or feel before you tell the story.
Yes.
So, so I think there's the front end, know who you're talking to, and the back end, what do you want them to do, think, or feel when you're done? Those are the two places I see most corporate, especially corporate storytellers fail. They don't, they haven't paid enough attention to those two details. They've worked on all the other mechanics of how to tell a story, right? But they haven't managed those two elements, and those two are the elements that I would argue make the difference between good and great as a storyteller.
It's so powerful, so powerful. I remember, when we were together at Book in a Weekend, you read the opening lines of Bubba Watson's book.
Mm,
And it's like, oh my gosh, like, how am I ever going to put this book down just by the opening lines?
right.
And so, crafting this message or this story, and I have found this because I spent a lot of years in sales as well, Don, and clearly many years in leadership. I feel like storytelling takes the complex and makes it simple
That's
and so
exactly.
easy to digest.
Yep. And if it doesn't, then it's not a good story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
If it actually takes
exactly.
the complex and makes it more
Everybody's
complex,
scratching their head.
then you're screwed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I want to ask, 175 episodes roughly in your current
Yeah.
show, Corporate Competitor Podcast. You've had, I mean, some amazing interviews.
Mm,
Fortune 500 execs who've played sports and the like. What are thinking about the Corporate Competitor Podcast?
mhm,
When you think back of all those interviews and things that maybe you've even learned during the interviews, what are some of your favorite lessons that you've learned interviewing some of these
mhm.
professionals?
Wow. So one of them I loved, Condoleezza Rice. Had Condoleezza Rice on, right? I mean, it's pretty awesome, right? Former Secretary
Yeah,
of State, pretty amazing.
yeah.
Not an easy podcast guest to get. Unfortunately, I'd interviewed her when she was in the White House, and I was at
Wow.
Sports Illustrated. So we had some history. But in working with Condoleezza Rice, one of the things I loved about her was she talked a lot about her love of football, right? She actually her dream job is to be the commissioner of the NFL one day.
Wow.
And
Let's do
so
it.
she loves football. She was her dad was a football coach, and she was he didn't have a son, so she was with him on the sidelines. She could actually tell him based on the way they're lined up, they're going to run a draw right here, Dad, when she was only 6 years old. So it was pretty amazing. But Condi used to say that the most important thing about every team that she wants to look at as a team of significance is that they have to have an identity, right? What, when the chips are down, what do you know they're going to do,
Hmm.
right? You look at Michigan State basketball.
Hmm.
What do you know, right? Things get tough. Tom Izzo says, by the way, you ain't going to get tougher than us. Like
Hmm.
you will remember on the next day that you played us last night, because that is their identity. They do not run from it. And man, it is the game is on the line. What will you get from Michigan State basketball? You're going to get a bruise, is what you're going to get.
And some of that's carried over into the NBA, by the way.
Right. Yeah. But it's this sense of like, what is your identity? I
Mm.
love that because it reminded me that, as a team, many of us are I we have no identity, right? We have nothing that if you asked us to tell you what you to expect from our team, we'd ramble all over the place and we'd throw out phrases that, but we can't give you an identity. The best teams have one. I love that. And as Condi expressed that to me, I really started studying the teams again that I valued. And there's no question they have great identity. The other line that I really loved came from one of our guests who actually runs sports memorabilia, one of the largest sports memorabilia companies in the world. And he said consistency over time equals credibility. And I love that line, right?
Hmm.
Consistency over time equals
Hmm.
credibility. And so, Jeff, when you and I are talking about what we do for a living and what we want others to see, we want to be seen as credible. It's the number one word I'd want to be assigned to me when you're done, right? Inspirational, I hope that's good. Made you feel something, that's awesome. But more importantly, I want you to say that guy, like I believe him because just the way I heard him come off, like that guy is credible.
Yeah.
How do you get to credibility? Consistency over time.
Hmm.
It's not, I'm not, I can't just be in this conversation with you today.
Hmm.
If we do it again tomorrow, I need to be in the conversation with you again tomorrow.
Hmm.
And
That's good.
how, because if you're here one day, and by, I don't know if this is on video or audio also, but if you're high one day, low the next, high the next, I mean, and nobody around you knows when you walk through the door what they're going to get. By the way, you don't have the credibility to lead. Your
Mm-mm.
team needs to know what's coming from you every day. Consistency over time equals credibility.
It's
And
so true.
that line means so much to me. The reason I took my glasses off is because these are reading glasses. I can only read what's in front of me with them on.
Sure.
That sign, I wrote it on a whiteboard across the room because it meant that much to me. Like I kept thinking, I want that to be the way people judge me. Consistency.
Yes.
So
Same, Don.
yeah.
When you were saying that story, the thing that came to my mind was Ritz Carlton.
Ah,
It's
horse.
like that's like, and I mean, you could go with other brands or whatever, but it's like you don't get a brand like that by getting it right sometimes.
Nope.
Like you're getting it right for decades, and all
Ladies
of
and
a sudden
gentlemen,
now
serving
everybody
ladies and
knows what
gentlemen.
they're getting.
Right. Horst Schulze, who was the founder of Ritz Carlton,
Yep.
was a guest on our podcast. And we record these sessions, and they're usually about 45, 50 minutes when we record them. And then we do some editing and get them down to low 30s, right? Horst Schulze was so good, we couldn't edit him down.
Mm,
So we cut him into two sessions, and he was two basically 25-minute long sessions. He's that good. So
he is. I've
if you
read
get a
all his
chance,
stuff.
if you
It's
get a chance,
amazing.
go find Corporate Competitor Podcast. Look for Horst Schulze.
Yeah, that'll be a good one. Couple questions for a speed round, may I?
Sure.
So you're there on a park bench, you're overlooking a beautiful pond, a lake, enjoying life. Alive or deceased, who would you want to come sit with you on that bench for another conversation?
Oh, another conversation would be John Wooden.
Yeah.
I'd love to have Coach Wooden back. I'd love to be just I never left his presence without feeling like I was a better man.
Hmm.
And man, there's a few people I could say that about in my life, but John Wooden, like I mean, I still to this day I have I can see in my mind every time I would drive out of the little parking garage underneath his condo, Coach would come out and stand on the back deck. He lived on the second floor of this little condo. Come out and stand on the back deck just to wave at me. And I just like, and every time I drove away, I kept wondering, is this the last time I'll see him? Because he
Hmm.
was he was old, right?
Yeah.
Boy, I'd give anything to be on a bench again with him.
Do you ever just find yourself driving by yourself somewhere beautiful and just think, wow, John Wooden was my mentor?
Hmm.
Like, does it still like shock you?
Probably not because he was so humble about it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you and I talking about it today make it a bigger deal than he made it when I was with him.
I can imagine, but it's just it's amazing.
Yeah.
What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Um, I'll go back to Coach Wood. He used to say, make each day your masterpiece. And you'd think, "Oh, that sounds simple, right? It's gonna make a day a masterpiece. That's awesome. I'm gonna go do something big today. That's good." That's not a masterpiece day. For it to be a masterpiece day, I will have had to have prepared the day before to be ready for whatever I'm gonna encounter today. I will have had to be fully present in every conversation. I mean, you start listing off what it takes to create a masterpiece day, and you realize how hard it is. But
Hmm.
John Wood used to say, make each day your masterpiece.
Hmm.
And I would say to him, Coach, that sounds really easy. Then it sounds daunting. And he goes, yeah, but you do it. Do it once. and then you feel so energized at the end of the day that you want to do it again, and then you do seven of those and you've had a week, right? Imagine. And that was the way John Wooden lived his life. Make each day your masterpiece. And that's my favorite quote from him, and I think about it all the time.
If you
Am
do
I
that
making,
consistently, your life is a masterpiece.
am I making today a masterpiece?
I love it. Talk to the young crowd that maybe is listening. What would you say to what advice do you give 23-year-old Don Yeager?
Slow down. I was in such a hurry for so much of my 20s and 30s. Like I needed a better title, I needed a better job, I needed more money, I needed. And what I didn't slow down to really fully appreciate was what I had. And uh, I often I didn't even feel like now if I look back, I would tell you I didn't really appreciate what I achieved because I was constantly in the pursuit of the next thing.
Mm.
And and I think sometimes you really need to do that individually. You need to slow down and just say, you know what, what just happened? That was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I think you can build from those things as well. But I
Yeah.
feel like I ran pretty hard in maybe that's just a 20s and 30s thing. I don't know.
Yeah, but and so my guess is when you say what advice, it's maybe the dumbest advice of all because everyone can tell it to you. Probably no one will ever
It's
do it.
so true.
But it's if I
I
really
agree
go back
though.
and think about it, it's just I um I didn't in any way I didn't appreciate what was
Well, hey,
happening.
there might be a handful of people that needed to hear that right now. That's thinking they're spent and not doing it right and they're exhausted and burnt out. And here you have Don Yeager, who has accomplished amazing things. He's telling you it's okay to slow down.
Yeah.
Man, you've done so many amazing things. We've talked about a lot of them. What haven't you done yet that's high on your list of, man, I would love to do this?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know.
An interview that you haven't had yet
Uh,
or
I
a
mean,
person you
there's a
haven't
couple
met?
of books. There's a couple of books I'd love to write one day. I'd love to write a book with Roger Federer, the tennis player. I
Hmm.
probably will never get that chance. He'll never do it. But I mean, I was always fascinated by him. Like there's somebody that you could never tell if he was winning or losing based upon the way he was conducting himself.
Hmm.
And I always thought that's something I really wish I could do. Like I wish I unfortunately wear way too much of my emotion on my sleeve, and you can tell like as good is done is done, I is done, good is bad. I mean, what's just happened? And so trying to be it's back to that consistency over time. That's what Roger was. And it
Hmm.
would be something I aspire to. So I
Yep.
was always fascinated by him, would love to have written a book with him.
It's
But
not too late. I mean, hey, it's out there now. We're gonna find
I
out.
don't see him ever doing it. What he could earn on a book is a rounding error compared to what he's earned in his career. So I don't see him doing it because you have to dig in deep to write a good book.
Hmm.
And so anyway.
Commitment. Is there anything you're currently working on that we should know about or be on the watch for? Obviously, you got a book coming out with Prime Time.
I need
Anything
everybody to
else?
buy one of those books. We need books. We're trying to get to 12 New York Times bestsellers team. Do me a
Let's
favor.
do this.
Go on and click order right now. Uh,
Yes. And by
I'm,
the way, get the bundle package. Great teams in this one that I'm holding up because I'll tell you, these have helped me personally.
well, thank you. Yeah, I'm writing a book right now on the science of momentum. That is kind of a little off the beaten, off the track for me. It's not what I normally do, but I'm studying the science of momentum. How do we prepare for it, right? How do you prepare for a moment to actually allow you to propel yourself into special space? How do you once you've prepared for it, and momentum comes your way? How do you extend it? How do you reverse it if you're on the wrong side of it?
Hmm.
So I've been digging in with over 1,000 leaders over the course of the last few years, studying momentum, and I'm fascinated by it.
Man, we all need a little bit of that because once you have it, it's kind of hard to stop it too.
Well, but it does stop at some stage. That's the thing about momentum, right? It stops, and
Yeah.
then you got to recreate it. So that's the juice, right? Is how do you
Yeah.
create? So I mean, I'll share with you right here. See, there's the model that we've already built with
There it
based on
is.
all these
So
interviews.
how to get it
Um,
and how to keep it. And
how
if
to
you
get it,
lose
how
it,
to
how do
keep
you
it
start it back up?
correct, and if you're on the wrong side of it, how do you reverse it?
Man. And we're all going to face it. So that'll be another one. And
Absolutely,
by the way, the website's amazing. A lot of good content on there. Amazing blog. Listener, go check it out because he has some really good online training as well that I've looked into. You won't be disappointed in that. Don, your time is so valuable. I'm glad 3 years in the making. Here we are, and it's truly an honor, a privilege to have you on the show. You're certainly a gift to this generation, and your legacy is no doubt going to impact generations to come. So thank you so much.
Jeff. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Hey, listener, go check out Don's website, donyaeger.com. It's going to be in the show notes, of course. There'll be links in there, as well as questions for you to reflect, application activities. To get them sent direct to your inbox, go to jeffhancher.com. Get signed up for all of those. We'll have the links in the show notes. Until next week, keep making a big leadership impact, keep building great teams, and never stop turning the pressure into potential.